The morning sun cast long shadows across the animal shelter parking lot as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez pulled his weathered pickup truck into an empty space. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles white against the black leather. 3 months had passed since he returned from his final deployment in Afghanistan, and the nightmares still came like clockwork every Tuesday at 3 a.m. Marcus had driven past this shelter dozens of times over the past few weeks, always finding an excuse to turn around. Today was different. Today, his therapist's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected places, Marcus. Maybe it's time to consider getting a companion. The idea of replacing Zeus felt like betrayal. Zeus had been more than a military working dog. He had been Marcus's lifeline during 2 grueling deployments. Together they had swept countless roads for improvised explosive devices, saved hundreds of lives, and formed a bond that transcended the typical human-animal relationship. When Zeus stepped on that hidden pressure plate during their final mission, taking the blast meant for Marcus, a part of the Marine's soul had died with his 4-legged partner. Marcus walked through the shelter's front door, immediately hit by the familiar sounds of barking dogs and the antiseptic smell that reminded him too much of military facilities. A young volunteer with kind eyes and a name tag reading Sarah approached him with the enthusiasm typical of someone who genuinely loved animals. "Are you looking to adopt today?" she asked, her voice bright with hope. Marcus nodded slowly, unsure of what exactly he was looking for. "Maybe. I'm not really sure what I want." Sarah led him through the main corridor past kennels filled with dogs of every size and breed. She chattered about each animal's story: the rescued pit bull who loved children, the elderly beagle whose owner had passed away, the energetic border collie mix who needed an active family. Marcus listened politely, but nothing felt right. None of these dogs were Zeus, and he was beginning to think this whole endeavor was a mistake. They reached the end of the main corridor when Sarah paused. "We have a few more dogs in the special care section. Some of them have been here longer, or they have particular needs. Would you like to see them?" Marcus shrugged, following her down a quieter hallway. The kennels here were larger, more comfortable, and housed fewer animals. Sarah explained that these were often older dogs or those with behavioral issues that made them harder to place. "This is Buddy," she said, stopping in front of a kennel that housed a large German shepherd with graying fur around his muzzle. "He's 8 years old. Came to us about 6 months ago when his previous owner moved to a nursing home. He's perfectly healthy, just a bit set in his ways." Marcus glanced at the dog, who was lying in the corner of his kennel, facing away from the visitors. There was something familiar about the way the dog held himself, alert even in rest, ears constantly moving to track sounds. It reminded Marcus of the way military working dogs carried themselves, always ready, always vigilant. "Has he had any training?" Marcus asked, surprised by his own interest. The previous owner said he had some basic obedience training, but nothing special. "He's actually quite well behaved, just seems a bit sad since he arrived. The older dogs often have a harder time adjusting to shelter life." As Sarah spoke, Marcus found himself studying the German shepherd more closely. The dog's build was similar to Zeus's, though this one was clearly older and carried himself with the weariness that came with age and disappointment. There was something about the way he held his head that tugged at something deep in Marcus's chest. "Can I meet him?" Marcus heard himself asking. Sarah's face lit up. "Of course. Buddy doesn't get many visitors. Let me get him set up in one of the meeting rooms." As Sarah prepared to move the dog, Marcus watched through the kennel bars. The German shepherd slowly rose to his feet, stretching in a way that Marcus recognized, the careful movement of a dog whose joints had seen better days, but whose spirit remained strong. When the dog finally turned toward them, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. Those eyes, dark brown, intelligent, and filled with a depth that spoke of experiences beyond a typical pet's life. For just a moment, Marcus could have sworn he was looking at Zeus again. The rational part of his mind knew it was impossible, but something about this dog called to him in a way he hadn't expected. Sarah opened the kennel door and gently coaxed the dog out with a leash. "Come on, buddy, someone wants to meet you." The German shepherd walked calmly beside Sarah, his gait measured and purposeful. As they passed Marcus, the dog's head turned slightly and their eyes met for just a second. In that brief moment, Marcus felt a jolt of recognition that he couldn't explain. The dog's expression seemed almost knowing. They entered the small meeting room and Sarah removed the leash. "Take your time," she said. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." Marcus sat down on the provided bench and the German Shepherd immediately sat as well, about 6 feet away. They regarded each other in silence, two warriors recognizing something familiar in each other's bearing. The dog's posture was perfect. Back straight, ears alert, eyes focused but not aggressive. It was the stance of a soldier at ease but ready for orders. "Hello, buddy," Marcus said softly, using the name Sarah had given him, though somehow it didn't feel quite right. The dog's ears perked up slightly at the sound of his voice, but he remained still. Watching, Marcus could see intelligence in those dark eyes, a sharpness that suggested this was no ordinary pet. There was something almost human in the way the dog seemed to be evaluating him, taking his measure. Minutes passed in comfortable silence. Marcus found himself thinking about Zeus again, about the countless hours they had spent together in similar quiet moments during their deployments. The bond between a soldier and his military working dog was unlike any other relationship, built on absolute trust, mutual respect, and the knowledge that each depended on the other for survival. As he sat there, Marcus began to notice small details about Buddy that reinforced his growing suspicion that this dog had a history beyond being someone's pet. The way he positioned himself to keep both Marcus and the door in view, the slight scarring on his front paws that could have come from rough terrain, the alert way he held his ears, constantly processing sounds from the hallway. "You're not just any dog, are you?" Marcus whispered. The question hung in the air between them, and for a moment Marcus could have sworn he saw something flicker in the German Shepherd's eyes. Recognition? Understanding? The dog remained motionless, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made Marcus's heart rate quicken. Marcus slowly extended his hand, palm up, in the universal gesture of peace that he had used countless times with military working dogs. To his surprise, Buddy immediately focused on his hand with laser-like attention. The dog's nostrils flared slightly as he processed Marcus's scent, and something shifted in his expression. "That's it," Marcus said softly, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Take your time." Buddy rose to his feet with deliberate precision and took a single step forward, then another. His movement was careful, calculated, nothing like the eager bouncing of a typical shelter dog meeting a potential adopter. This was the approach of a professional, a dog who had been trained to assess situations before acting. When Buddy was close enough, he sniffed Marcus's outstretched hand thoroughly. Marcus held perfectly still, allowing the dog to gather whatever information he needed. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility and something that felt almost like destiny. Then, without warning, Buddy sat down directly in front of Marcus and offered his paw. Marcus stared at the offered paw, his throat tightening with emotion. It was such a simple gesture, but it was exactly what Zeus used to do when they first met each day in Afghanistan, a formal greeting between partners, a ritual that said, "I'm ready to work," or "I trust you," or simply, "I remember you." With trembling fingers, Marcus reached out and gently shook the offered paw. The moment their skin and fur touched, Buddy's entire demeanor changed. His tail began to wag slowly, not with the frantic excitement of a dog seeking attention, but with the measured rhythm of a soldier acknowledging a comrade. "My God," Marcus whispered, the pieces beginning to fall into place in his mind. "You're military, aren't you?" At the word military, Buddy's ears pricked forward sharply, and he tilted his head in the way that military working dogs did when they heard a familiar command. Marcus felt his pulse racing as suspicions he had barely dared to consider began to crystallize into certainty. Sarah knocked on the door and peeked in. "How are you two getting along?" Marcus looked up at her, his mind racing with questions. "Sarah, what do you know about Buddy's history? You said he came from an elderly owner, but has anyone looked into his background more thoroughly?" Sarah entered the room fully, surprised by the intensity in Marcus's voice. "Well, the paperwork we received was pretty basic. Mr. Henderson, his previous owner, was 92 and had to move into assisted living. He said he'd had Buddy for about 3 years, got him from someone who couldn't keep him anymore." "Why?" 3 years, Marcus repeated, doing quick math in his head. That would place Buddy's previous placement right around the time when military working dogs from Afghanistan were being retired and rehomed. "Did Mr. Henderson mention anything about Buddy's behavior?" Any special training or unusual habits? Sarah looked puzzled but answered thoughtfully. Actually, now that you mention it, yes. Mr. Henderson said Buddy was the most well-behaved dog he'd ever owned. Never chewed anything, never had accidents in the house, came when called every single time. He also mentioned that Buddy seemed to have nightmares sometimes, which the vet said wasn't uncommon in older dogs. Nightmares. Marcus knew all about those. He also knew that many military working dogs suffered from their own form of PTSD after deployment, just like their human counterparts. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I know it might sound strange. Marcus paused, gathering his courage. Has anyone ever checked to see if Buddy might be a retired military working dog? Sarah's eyes widened. Military? Oh my goodness, I never thought about that. But how would we find out? Marcus was already reaching for his phone. Military working dogs have microchips with special identification numbers. They also have tattoos in their ears for identification. Would it be okay if I checked? Sarah nodded eagerly, clearly caught up in the possibility of solving a mystery that had been right under their noses. Marcus knelt down beside Buddy, who remained perfectly still as Marcus gently examined his ears. There, in his left ear, was a faded but still visible tattoo with a series of numbers and letters. Marcus's hands shook as he photographed the tattoo with his phone. Got it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. While Sarah watched in fascination, Marcus pulled up a contact in his phone. Sergeant Major Williams, who worked in the military working dog program at Lackland Air Force Base. If anyone could help him trace this tattoo, it would be Williams. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Williams here. Sergeant Major, this is Marcus Rodriguez. I served 2 deployments with Zeus, remember? Rodriguez. How the hell are you, son? I heard about Zeus. Damn shame losing a good dog like that. Marcus swallowed hard. Thank you, Sergeant Major. Listen, I need a favor. I'm at an animal shelter and I think I've found a retired MWD. I've got his ear tattoo. Can you run it through the system? Absolutely. What's the number? Marcus read off the series of numbers and letters from the photograph. There was a pause as Williams presumably entered the information into his computer. The silence stretched on so long that Marcus began to worry the connection had been lost. Sergeant Major, you still there? Rodriguez. Williams's voice came back, and it sounded different somehow. Strained. Where did you say you found this dog? Animal shelter in Colorado Springs. They called him Buddy. Said he'd been with an elderly owner for 3 years. Why, what did you find? Another long pause. Son, according to our records, the dog you're looking at is Zulu, Army MWD, served 3 deployments in Afghanistan from 2018 to 2021. His handler was killed in action during their final mission, and Zulu was retired immediately afterward, due to behavioral issues stemming from the trauma. Marcus felt the world shift around him. Killed in action? Who was his handler? Staff Sergeant David Chen. Good man, good handler. The report says Zulu witnessed the IED explosion that killed Chen and refused to work with any other handler afterward. Poor dog was traumatized beyond return to duty. Marcus looked down at Buddy, Zulu, who was watching him with those intelligent brown eyes that had seen too much. A fellow veteran, a survivor carrying his own invisible wounds. Sergeant Major, Marcus said slowly. What happened to Zulu after he was retired? Let me check. Looks like he was placed with a veteran family in Kansas initially, but it didn't work out. The family said he was too aggressive with strangers and had severe anxiety issues. After that, he went to an elderly veteran in Colorado who specifically requested a retired MWD. That must have been your Mr. Henderson. Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes as the full picture emerged. Zulu had lost his partner just as Marcus had lost Zeus. They were both carrying the weight of survivor's guilt, both struggling to find their place in a world that felt too quiet, too safe, too empty without their fallen brothers. There's something else, Rodriguez, Williams continued. I'm looking at the mission reports from Zulu's final deployment. He and Chen were working the same area where you and Zeus operated. In fact, according to this, Zulu found the IED that killed Chen just 2 days after Zeus was killed. The phone slipped from Marcus's nerveless fingers as the full impact of Williams's words hit him. Zulu had been there. He had witnessed the same horror, fought the same fight, lost his partner in the same God-forsaken stretch of Afghan desert where Zeus had made his final sacrifice. Marcus bent down and picked up his phone with shaking hands. Williams was still talking, but his voice sounded distant and muffled as if coming through water. Marcus's vision blurred as memories he had fought to suppress came flooding back with startling clarity. The last mission. The desert heat that seemed to bake everything into submission. Zeus working ahead of him, nose to the ground, tail held high in concentration. The moment when Zeus suddenly stopped, his body going rigid in the way that meant danger. The split second of warning that had saved Marcus's life but cost Zeus everything. Rodriguez. Rodriguez, you still there? Marcus blinked, forcing himself back to the present. Yeah, I'm here. I said there's something else in Zulu's file you should know. After Chen was killed, Zulu wouldn't eat for 8 days. The veterinarians were worried they were going to lose him too. When they finally got him to eat again, he would only take food from female handlers. The behavioral specialists think he associated male voices with the trauma of losing Chen. Marcus looked down at Zulu, who had moved closer during the phone conversation and was now sitting pressed against Marcus's leg. The warmth of the dog's body was grounding, real, a reminder that they were both here, both alive, both survivors. Sergeant Major, I need to adopt this dog. I figured you might say that. Listen, Rodriguez, I'm going to be straight with you. Zulu's got issues. The reports from his placement attempts show severe separation anxiety, hypervigilance, and aggressive protective behaviors. The Kansas family returned him after he bit a postal worker who got too close to the house. Are you sure you're ready for that? Marcus thought about his own sleepless nights, the way he startled at unexpected sounds, the crushing loneliness that had settled over him since losing Zeus. Sergeant Major, I think we might be exactly what each other needs. Williams was quiet for a moment. You know what, son? You might just be right. I'll send you all the documentation you need for the adoption. Zulu's medical records, his service history, everything. That dog deserves to be with someone who understands what he's been through. After Marcus ended the call, he sat in silence with Zulu, processing everything he had learned. Sarah had left them alone again, sensing that something significant was happening. The meeting room felt smaller somehow, charged with the weight of shared history and unspoken understanding. Zulu, Marcus said softly, testing the name. The dog's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. His ears shot forward, his back straightened, and he looked directly into Marcus's eyes with an alertness that hadn't been there when he was called Buddy. This was a name that meant something to him, a name that connected him to who he had been before the shelter, before the trauma, before everything fell apart. You remember, don't you? Marcus whispered. You remember being a soldier. Zulu's tail began to wag slowly, and he pressed closer to Marcus's side. It was as if hearing his real name had awakened something in him that had been dormant for months. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his military ID, the one he still carried out of habit even though his service days were behind him. He held it out for Zulu to sniff, watching as the dog's nostrils flared and his expression grew even more focused. The reaction was everything Marcus had hoped for and more. Zulu's entire body seemed to vibrate with recognition. He stood up and moved to Marcus's other side, then sat in the perfect heel position that every military working dog learned in their first weeks of training. His posture was textbook military, back straight, eyes forward, ready for orders. At ease, Marcus said quietly, using the command that would release Zulu from the formal position. Zulu immediately relaxed but remained close, leaning his shoulder against Marcus's leg in a gesture that spoke of trust and partnership. Marcus felt tears running down his face as he realized that this magnificent animal had been waiting all this time for someone who would understand, someone who spoke his language, someone who knew what it meant to lose everything in service to others. Sarah returned to the room and stopped short when she saw them. The change in both man and dog was remarkable. Marcus looked more alive than he had when he'd first walked into the shelter, and Buddy, Zulu, seemed to have transformed from a depressed shelter dog into the alert, confident working animal he had once been. I'm guessing you'd like to adopt him, Sarah asked, though the answer was written clearly on both their faces. More than anything, Marcus replied, but there are some things you need to know about his background. Marcus spent the next 20 minutes explaining what they had discovered about Zulu's military service and trauma. Sarah listened with growing amazement and sadness, occasionally glancing down at Zulu as if seeing him for the first time. That explains so much about his behavior, she said when Marcus finished. The way he never relaxed completely, how he always seemed to be watching for something. We thought he was just adjusting poorly to shelter life, but he was probably having flashbacks. Most likely, Marcus agreed. Military working dogs can develop PTSD just like human soldiers. The good news is that with the right environment and someone who understands his background, he can recover and learn to trust again. Sarah wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. I can't believe he's been here for 6 months and we never knew. That poor baby has been suffering in silence all this time. Marcus knelt down beside Zulu and looked into his eyes. Not anymore. We're going home, partner. We're going to figure this out together. Zulu's response was to gently place his paw on Marcus's arm, the same gesture he had made earlier, but somehow more deliberate now, more meaningful. It was a promise between veterans, an understanding that they would watch each other's backs from now on. The adoption paperwork took longer than usual, as Sarah wanted to make sure everything was perfect for Zulu's transition. She also insisted on giving Marcus all of Buddy's favorite toys and the special blanket he had claimed as his own. During his stay at the shelter, he's going to need familiar things for the first few weeks, she explained. Change is hard for dogs who've been through trauma. Marcus was grateful for her thoughtfulness and expertise. It was clear that Sarah genuinely cared about the animals in her care, and he promised to keep her updated on Zulu's progress. As they prepared to leave, Marcus realized he had one more call to make. He dialed Sergeant Major Williams again. Williams here. Sergeant Major, it's Rodriguez again. I wanted you to know that the adoption is going through. Zulu's coming home with me today. Outstanding. Listen, Rodriguez, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about you two being what each other needs. I've seen a lot of handlers and working dogs over the years, and the best partnerships are always between individuals who understand each other's struggles. You've both lost partners, you've both seen combat, and you're both trying to find your way in civilian life. If that's not fate, I don't know what is. Marcus looked down at Zulu, who was sitting calmly beside him, occasionally glancing up as if checking to make sure Marcus wasn't going anywhere without him. I think you're right. Sergeant Major, I think we're going to be okay. I know you are, son. And Rodriguez, thank you for giving that dog a second chance. He served his country with honor, and he deserves to spend his retirement with someone who appreciates that service. As Marcus ended the call, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope that comes from denial, but the steady, grounded hope that comes from finding purpose again. He had a mission now, a partner who needed him as much as he needed Zulu. The drive home was unlike anything Marcus had experienced since returning from Afghanistan. For the first time in months, he wasn't alone with his thoughts and memories. Zulu sat in the passenger seat with the dignity of a seasoned traveler, occasionally glancing out the window but always returning his attention to Marcus, as if making sure his new partner was doing okay. Marcus had rolled down the window slightly, and he watched as Zulu lifted his nose to catch the scents carried on the mountain air. There was something almost meditative about the way the dog processed his environment, alert but not anxious, aware but not hyper-vigilant. It was the behavior of a professional taking stock of a new operational area. You're probably wondering where we're going, Marcus said, feeling only slightly foolish about talking to the dog. It's not much, but it's quiet. No crowds, no unexpected visitors. Just us. Zulu's ears pricked at the sound of Marcus's voice, and he turned to look at him with those intelligent brown eyes. Marcus had the distinct impression that Zulu understood far more than most people would believe. Marcus's house sat on 5 acres of wooded land outside Colorado Springs, a deliberate choice he had made upon returning from his final deployment. After years of living in cramped quarters with dozens of other Marines, the space and solitude had felt like luxury. Now, as he pulled into his driveway with Zulu beside him, he realized how lonely it had actually been. When Marcus turned off the engine, Zulu remained perfectly still, waiting for permission to exit the vehicle. It was another small confirmation of his military training. No military working dog would leave a vehicle without clearance from their handler. Okay, boy. Let's go home. Zulu waited while Marcus opened the passenger door, then hopped down with an ease that belied his age. He immediately began a methodical inspection of the immediate area, nose to the ground, moving in a pattern that Marcus recognized as a security sweep. Old habits died hard, especially for dogs who had spent years ensuring their handlers' safety. Marcus watched this behavior with a mixture of admiration and sadness. Even in retirement, even after months in a shelter, Zulu's instincts were to protect and serve. It was both beautiful and heartbreaking to witness. "The perimeter's secure," Marcus said gently, using terminology he knew Zulu would understand. "This is home base now." At the word home, Zulu paused in his inspection and looked back at Marcus. Something in his expression seemed to relax slightly, as if he was allowing himself to believe that this might actually be a safe place to rest. Marcus led Zulu up the front steps and into the house. The interior was spartanly furnished, a reflection of Marcus's military lifestyle and his struggle to make the place feel like home rather than just a temporary billet. Zulu's inspection continued inside, but it was less intense now, more curious than tactical. The house tour ended in the living room, where Marcus had set up Zulu's bed near the couch, but with a clear view of both the front door and the back sliding glass door. He had learned enough about military working dogs to know that Zulu would want to maintain situational awareness even while resting. "This is your space," Marcus explained, gesturing to the bed and the collection of toys Sarah had sent along. "You don't have to use it if you don't want to, but it's yours." Zulu approached the bed cautiously, sniffing thoroughly before placing one paw on it experimentally. When nothing bad happened, he stepped fully onto the bed and turned in a circle before settling down with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul. Marcus felt his throat tighten as he watched Zulu finally allow himself to relax. The dog's eyes were still alert, still tracking sounds and movements, but his body was loose and comfortable for the first time since Marcus had met him. "I know how you feel," Marcus said softly, settling onto the couch. "It's hard to let your guard down when you've seen what we've seen." As if responding to the understanding in Marcus's voice, Zulu lifted his head and looked at him. For a long moment they simply regarded each other, two veterans recognizing their shared burden. The first night was challenging for both of them. Marcus had expected that Zulu might have difficulty sleeping in a new environment, but he hadn't anticipated how the dog's presence would affect his own sleep patterns. When Marcus's recurring nightmare jerked him awake at 3 a.m., he found Zulu standing beside the bed, alert and ready for whatever threat had disturbed his handler. "It's okay," Marcus whispered, his heart still racing from the dream images of explosions and falling bodies. "Just a nightmare. We're safe." Zulu studied him for a moment, then did something unexpected. He placed his front paws on the edge of the bed and rested his chin on the mattress near Marcus's hand. It was a gesture of comfort, of solidarity, that spoke of understanding beyond words. Marcus reached out and gently stroked Zulu's head, feeling the soft fur and the warmth of living companionship. "You have them too, don't you? The dreams about that day." Zulu's tail gave a small wag, not with happiness but with acknowledgement. They both carried the weight of memories that refused to stay buried, images that haunted their sleep and made rest feel dangerous. From that night forward, they developed an unspoken routine. When one of them was disturbed by nightmares, the other would provide silent support. Marcus would find his hand resting on Zulu's back when the dog whimpered in his sleep, and Zulu would appear beside Marcus's bed whenever anxiety pulled him from sleep. The days began to take on a rhythm that felt almost normal. Marcus had been struggling with structure since leaving the military. Civilian life seemed to lack the clear purpose and routine that had defined his adult life. But caring for Zulu gave him reason to get up each morning, to maintain schedules, to think about something other than his own pain. Their morning walks became extended reconnaissance missions through the surrounding woods. Zulu would range ahead, always checking back to ensure Marcus was following, investigating interesting scents and maintaining awareness of their environment. Marcus found these walks therapeutic in a way that his therapist's office never quite achieved. During one of their walks, about a week after bringing Zulu home, they encountered their neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, walking her elderly golden retriever. Marcus had spoken with her only briefly in the month since moving in, but she was a kind woman who always waved when they saw each other. "I see you got yourself a companion," she called out cheerfully as they approached. Marcus felt Zulu tense beside him, the dog's protective instincts engaging at the approach of strangers. "Easy," Marcus murmured, placing a calming hand on Zulu's head. "Friend," Mrs. Patterson stopped several feet away, clearly noticing Zulu's alert posture. "He's beautiful." "What's his name?" "Zulu." Marcus replied, watching as his dog maintained perfect heel position while assessing the potential threat level of Mrs. Patterson and her golden retriever. That's an unusual name. Is he a rescue? Marcus considered how much to share. In a way, he's a retired military working dog. He served in Afghanistan. Mrs. Patterson's expression immediately shifted to one of respect and understanding. Oh my goodness. A veteran just like you. How wonderful that you found each other. It was exactly the right thing to say. Marcus felt some of his tension ease, and he noticed that Zulu's posture relaxed slightly as well, picking up on Marcus's emotional state. He's still adjusting to civilian life, Marcus explained. It can be difficult for working dogs to retire, especially when they've been through combat. Mrs. Patterson nodded knowingly. My late husband was a veteran, Korea. He used to say that the hardest part wasn't the war itself, but learning how to live with peace afterward. Her words hit Marcus with unexpected force. That was exactly what he had been struggling with. How to exist in a world that felt too quiet, too safe, too removed from the purpose that had defined him for so many years. As weeks passed, Marcus began to notice subtle changes in both himself and Zulu. The dog was gradually becoming less hypervigilant, though he never completely let his guard down. His coat was shinier, his appetite more consistent, and most importantly, Marcus caught glimpses of what Zulu might have been like before the trauma. Playful moments when he would chase a squirrel or investigate an interesting smell with genuine curiosity rather than tactical assessment. Marcus found himself looking forward to their daily routines. The morning walks had expanded to include training sessions where he worked with Zulu on basic commands, not because the dog needed the training, but because the structure and purpose seemed to benefit both of them. Zulu's military precision had never left him, and watching him execute commands with crisp efficiency filled Marcus with a pride he hadn't felt since his own service days. One particularly clear morning, as they practiced recall commands in the large backyard, Marcus made a decision that had been building in his mind for days. He pulled out his phone and called Dr. Elizabeth Carter, the therapist he had been seeing since his return from Afghanistan. Dr. Carter, it's Marcus Rodriguez. I was wondering if I could bring someone to our next session. There was a pause before she responded. Marcus, you know I don't typically do couples therapy in my practice. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd experienced in months. It's not a person, Dr. Carter, it's my dog. His name is Zulu, and he's a retired military working dog. I think you need to meet him to understand what's been happening with me lately. Dr. Carter's interest was immediately piqued. She had been working with Marcus for months, watching him struggle with survivor's guilt, depression, and the inability to find meaning in civilian life. If something had changed, she wanted to understand what it was. That's quite unconventional, but I'm intrigued. Can you bring him in on Thursday? We'll be there. The appointment was unlike any therapy session Marcus had ever experienced. Zulu accompanied him into Dr. Carter's office with the calm professionalism of a working dog, though Marcus could see the slight tension in his posture that indicated he was assessing this new environment. Dr. Carter, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, observed both Marcus and Zulu with the trained attention of someone who made her living understanding human behavior. He's magnificent, she said quietly, noting how Zulu positioned himself where he could monitor both the door and the windows while staying close to Marcus. Tell me about how you found him. Marcus recounted the story of their meeting at the shelter, the discovery of Zulu's military background, and the connection they had formed over the past month. As he spoke, Dr. Carter watched the subtle interactions between man and dog. How Zulu would lean slightly against Marcus's leg when discussing difficult topics. How Marcus's voice became stronger and more confident when talking about their daily routines and training sessions. Marcus, Dr. Carter said when he finished, I've been working with you for 6 months, and this is the first time I've seen you speak about anything with genuine enthusiasm. What do you think has changed? Marcus considered the question, absently stroking Zulu's head as the dog rested beside his chair. I think it's having someone who understands. Zulu doesn't need me to explain why I wake up at 3 a.m. or why sudden loud noises make me jumpy. He just gets it because he's been there too. And how does it feel to be understood without having to explain yourself? Like I can breathe again, Marcus answered honestly. Like maybe I'm not broken after all, just different. changed by experiences that most people can't relate to. Dr. Carter made notes while observing how Zulu responded to the emotional weight in Marcus's voice by moving closer and resting his head on Marcus's knee. "What about Zulu? How do you think this relationship is affecting him?" Marcus looked down at his companion, noting the alert but relaxed way Zulu held himself. "He's remembering who he used to be, not the traumatized dog who was returned by multiple families, but the confident working dog who saved lives in Afghanistan. When we train together, when we walk our property, he moves like the professional he always was. It sounds like you're both healing together." "We are, but it's more than that." Marcus paused, searching for the right words. "We're giving each other permission to honor what we've been through instead of trying to pretend it never happened. Zulu doesn't judge me for having nightmares, and I don't expect him to act like a normal pet dog who's never seen combat." Dr. Carter leaned forward with interest. "That's a profound insight, Marcus. You're both accepting your histories as part of who you are now, rather than something to overcome or forget." Over the following weeks, Marcus began to notice that having Zulu by his side was opening doors he hadn't even realized were closed. When they encountered other veterans during their walks or trips to town, Zulu served as a conversation starter and a bridge of understanding. Other military personnel immediately recognized Zulu's bearing and training, and Marcus found himself part of a community he had felt disconnected from since his discharge. One afternoon, while shopping for dog food at the local feed store, Marcus was approached by a man roughly his own age wearing a baseball cap with Army insignia. "That's a beautiful German Shepherd," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm Tom Bradley, served in Iraq with the 82nd Airborne, Marcus Rodriguez, Marines. This is Zulu, retired military working dog from Afghanistan." Tom's eyes widened with respect as he looked at Zulu with new understanding. "No kidding? A real war dog. We worked with MWD teams downrange. Those dogs saved a lot of lives." "Zulu certainly did his share," Marcus replied, feeling a surge of pride in his partner's service. "Listen," Tom said, lowering his voice. "There's a group of us local vets who meet every Thursday night at Murphy's Bar. Nothing formal, just guys who understand what it's like coming back. You should join us sometime." Marcus had avoided social situations since his return, but something about Tom's genuine invitation and the way Zulu seemed comfortable with the interaction made him reconsider. "Maybe I will. Bring Zulu if you want. Murphy's is dog-friendly, and I guarantee the guys would love to meet a genuine hero." That Thursday evening, Marcus found himself standing outside Murphy's Bar with Zulu at his side, both of them nervous about entering this new social situation. The bar was a modest place with dim lighting and the comfortable, worn feel of an establishment that had been serving the community for decades. Tom spotted them immediately and waved them over to a corner table where 5 other men were gathered. The introductions were quick and casual. Iraq veterans, Afghanistan veterans, one who had served in both conflicts. But when Tom introduced Zulu and explained his background, the entire dynamic of the group shifted. These men understood what it meant to serve alongside military working dogs. They had stories of their own about the dog teams that had kept them safe, the handlers and their partners who had become legends in their units. For the first time since losing Zeus, Marcus found himself able to talk about his deployments, about the work he and Zeus had done, about the pride he had felt in their partnership. "My unit worked with a dog team in Kandahar," said Jake, a bearded man with kind eyes. Handler was this kid from Montana, couldn't have been more than 22. His dog was named Ranger, and that animal could find IEDs like they gave off heat signatures. Saved our convoy at least a dozen times. "What happened to them?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Both made it home safe, last I heard. Handler got out and became a cop back in Montana, took Ranger with him as a civilian dog." It was exactly the kind of happy ending that Marcus had hoped for himself and Zeus, the future that had been stolen by that final mission. But instead of the crushing grief he expected to feel, Marcus experienced something different. Looking at Zulu, who was calmly accepting attention from the other veterans, Marcus realized that perhaps there were different kinds of happy endings. Perhaps his story with Zeus had ended, but his story with Zulu was just beginning. "You know," Tom said toward the end of the evening, "we've been talking about starting some kind of outreach program for local veterans who are struggling with the transition. Having a genuine military working dog like Zulu involved might make a real difference. Dogs have a way of reaching people when humans can't." Marcus felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't experienced since his discharge, a sense of mission, of purpose beyond just surviving each day. What did you have in mind? Hospital visits, maybe some work with the VA counseling programs. Let other vets meet Zulu, share your story. Show them that healing is possible, that there's life after service. As Marcus drove home that night with Zulu beside him, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just a few short months. He had gone from a man trapped in isolation and grief to someone who was considering ways to help other veterans find their path forward. "What do you think, partner?" he asked Zulu as they pulled into their driveway. "Ready to get back to work?" Zulu's tail wagged in the darkness of the truck cab, and Marcus could swear the dog understood exactly what he was asking. 3 months later, Marcus and Zulu walked through the corridors of the Denver VA Medical Center with the confidence of a team that had found their new mission. Zulu wore a special vest identifying him as a therapy dog, though Marcus knew that designation barely scratched the surface of what his partner brought to these visits. Their first official outreach session had been with a young Army veteran named Private First Class Jennifer Walsh, who had lost her leg to an IED in Syria and was struggling with depression and thoughts of suicide. When the hospital social worker had suggested she meet with Marcus and Zulu, Jennifer had initially refused, insisting that talking to another veteran wouldn't change anything about her situation. But something about Zulu had broken through her defenses. Perhaps it was the way he had calmly positioned himself beside her wheelchair, without fuss or pity, or the intelligent understanding in his eyes when she finally began to talk about the explosion that had changed her life forever. By the end of that first session, Jennifer was sitting on the floor beside Zulu, her hands buried in his fur, crying tears she had been holding back for months. "He gets it," she had whispered to Marcus. "He really gets what it's like to lose everything in a split second." Word of Marcus and Zulu's work spread quickly through the VA system and the local veteran community. They began visiting the hospital twice a week, working with veterans suffering from PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and the crushing weight of transitioning from military to civilian life. Each veteran they met had a different story, but Zulu seemed to understand exactly what each person needed from him. With some veterans, he would simply lie quietly beside them, offering his presence as proof that survival was possible. With others, he would demonstrate his training, showing them that their military skills and experiences had value and meaning even in civilian life. And with the most wounded souls, he would share his own vulnerability, allowing them to see his scars and understand that healing didn't mean forgetting. Marcus found himself becoming an unofficial counselor, though he never claimed any professional training beyond his own experience. Veterans would open up to him in ways they couldn't with traditional therapists, sharing stories of combat and loss with someone who had walked the same path. He learned to listen without judgment, to offer hope without empty platitudes, and to help each person understand that their service had meaning, even if their military career had ended. Dr. Carter, who had begun consulting with Marcus on his outreach work, observed one of their sessions and was amazed by the transformation she witnessed. "Marcus, what you and Zulu are doing here isn't just therapy. It's healing on a soul level. You're showing these veterans that their experiences don't have to define them as victims, but can empower them as survivors." The work wasn't always easy. Some days Marcus would come home emotionally drained from hearing stories of pain and loss that mirrored his own experiences. On those days, Zulu seemed to understand that his handler needed extra support, staying closer than usual and offering the kind of wordless comfort that only animals can provide. One particularly difficult afternoon, they had worked with a Marine sergeant who had lost his entire squad in an ambush and was convinced that he should have died with them. The session had triggered memories for Marcus of his own survivor's guilt, and he found himself struggling to maintain his composure during the drive home. Zulu, sensing his distress, had placed his paw on Marcus's arm while they sat in the hospital parking lot, waiting for Marcus to collect himself before driving. It was a simple gesture, but it reminded Marcus that he wasn't alone in his pain, that healing was an ongoing process for both of them. "Some days are harder than others," Marcus said to Zulu, stroking the dog's graying muzzle. "But we're making a difference, aren't we?" As if in response, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer Walsh. 6 months clean and sober today, starting college in the fall. Thank you for showing me that broken doesn't mean worthless. Give Zulu a hug from me. Marcus felt tears sting his eyes as he read the message aloud to Zulu. These moments, the evidence that their work was genuinely helping people rebuild their lives, made every difficult day worthwhile. Their reputation had grown beyond the VA system. Marcus began receiving calls from other organizations wanting to learn about their methods, requests to speak at veteran gatherings, and invitations to train other therapy dog teams. He was careful to emphasize that what he and Zulu offered wasn't a replacement for professional treatment, but rather a complement to traditional therapy that could reach veterans in ways that conventional approaches sometimes couldn't. The local news station had heard about their work and requested an interview, though Marcus was hesitant about the attention. He didn't want their story to become a feel-good human interest piece that oversimplified the real struggles that veterans faced. When the reporter arrived at their home, Marcus was surprised by her thoughtful questions and genuine interest in understanding the deeper impact of their work. What would you say to people who wonder if animal therapy is really effective for serious mental health issues? She asked. Marcus considered his response carefully. I'd say that healing comes in many forms, and for veterans who have experienced trauma, sometimes the most powerful medicine is being understood by another survivor. Zulu and I don't claim to cure PTSD or depression, but we can show other veterans that it's possible to carry your scars with dignity, to find new purpose after loss, and to build meaningful relationships even when you feel broken. The reporter turned her attention to Zulu, who was lying calmly nearby, observing the interview with the alert interest of a professional. What makes Zulu special as a therapy dog? Zulu isn't just a therapy dog, Marcus replied, pride evident in his voice. He's a combat veteran who understands what it means to lose your partner, to carry survivor's guilt, to struggle with finding your place in a world that feels foreign after war. When he sits with another veteran, they recognize each other as warriors who have earned their rest. After the interview aired, Marcus was contacted by Sergeant Major Williams from Lackland Air Force Base. The conversation was brief but impactful. Rodriguez, I've been following your work with Zulu through the grapevine. I wanted you to know that the Military Working Dog Program has been watching what you're doing, and we're impressed. Have you ever considered formalizing this work? Maybe developing a program that could be replicated at other locations? The idea intrigued Marcus, though he was careful not to get ahead of himself. What would that look like, Sergeant Major? We're talking about a pilot program that would pair retired military working dogs with veteran handlers, specifically for therapeutic outreach. The dogs would receive specialized training, the handlers would get certification in peer counseling, and together they could serve veteran communities across the country. Marcus looked at Zulu, who seemed to sense the importance of the conversation and had moved closer to listen. Would there be support for something like that? Son, after what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, there are thousands of veterans struggling with the transition home, and hundreds of retired military working dogs who could benefit from having a sense of purpose again. If you and Zulu have figured out how to help both populations heal together, that's something the military wants to support. That evening, Marcus sat on his back porch with Zulu beside him, watching the sun set over the Colorado mountains and contemplating the possibilities that lay ahead. A year ago, he had been a broken man struggling to find meaning in a life that felt empty and purposeless. Now he was part of something larger than himself again, working alongside a partner who understood him completely. You know what I think, Zulu? Marcus said, scratching behind the dog's ears. I think Zeus would be proud of what we're doing. I think he'd be happy knowing that his sacrifice led to something good, that it brought us together so we could help others. Zulu's tail thumped against the porch boards, and he leaned into Marcus's touch with a contentment that spoke of a dog who had found his way home after a long and difficult journey. 1 year later, Marcus stood before an audience of military officials, veterinarians, and veteran advocates at the first annual Military Working Dog Legacy Conference in San Antonio, Texas. Zulu lay calmly beside the podium, wearing a medal of commendation that recognized his continued service to his fellow veterans. The conference had been organized to discuss the growing success of the pilot program that Marcus and Zulu had inspired. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice steady with the confidence that came from knowing his mission had meaning. When I walked into that animal shelter 18 months ago, I was a broken man looking for something I couldn't even name. I certainly wasn't looking to start a movement or change lives. I was just trying to survive each day. The audience listened intently as Marcus recounted their story. The chance meeting that felt like destiny, the discovery of Zulu's military background, and the gradual realization that they could help other veterans find their way forward. What Zulu taught me, Marcus continued, is that healing isn't about forgetting where you've been or pretending that trauma doesn't change you. It's about honoring your experiences while refusing to be defined by them. It's about finding new ways to serve, new missions that give meaning to the skills and strength you developed through hardship. In the audience, Marcus could see faces he recognized, veterans who had worked with him and Zulu, military officials who had supported the program's expansion, and journalists who had helped spread awareness of their work. But most importantly, he could see other handler dog teams that had been trained through the program, each pair representing hope for countless veterans who were still struggling to find their place in civilian life. The statistics were impressive. The pilot program had expanded to 12 cities across the United States, with 24 retired military working dogs and their veteran handlers providing peer support and therapy to over 800 veterans. The success rate in terms of reduced suicide ideation, decreased substance abuse, and improved quality of life metrics had caught the attention of the Department of Veterans Affairs, which was now funding the program's continued expansion. But for Marcus, the real measure of success wasn't in statistics, it was in the individual lives that had been transformed. Veterans like Jennifer Walsh, who had not only completed college but was now training to become a counselor herself. Like Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, who had found purpose again by pairing with a retired explosives detection dog named Rex and starting a program for veterans in rural Nevada. Like countless others who had discovered that their military service, including their wounds and scars, could become sources of strength rather than shame. After his presentation, Marcus was approached by a young Army veteran named Captain Sarah Mitchell, who walked with the aid of a prosthetic leg and was accompanied by a beautiful Belgian Malinois. "Mr. Rodriguez, I wanted to thank you personally," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I heard about your program 6 months ago when I was in the darkest place of my life. I lost my leg and my military career in the same explosion that killed my canine partner, Bruno. I thought my life was over." Marcus listened as Sarah explained how she had been paired with Duchess, a retired patrol dog whose handler had been killed in action. Together they were now working with female veterans in the Pacific Northwest, addressing the unique challenges faced by women warriors. "Duchess and I understand each other in ways that I never thought possible," Sarah continued. "She lost her handler just like I lost Bruno. But together we've found a way to honor their memories while building something new." These stories had become the heart of Marcus's work, not just the healing of individual veterans, but the creation of a community of survivors who supported each other through shared understanding and purpose. As the conference concluded, Marcus found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. The program now had a formal name, the Canine Legacy Foundation, and it had grown beyond anything he had imagined when he first sat in that shelter meeting room with a dog named Buddy, who turned out to be so much more. Dr. Carter, who had become the program's chief psychological consultant, approached Marcus as he prepared to leave the conference. "Marcus, I've watched you transform from a man who could barely function day to day into someone who's changing lives across the country. What do you think has made the difference?" Marcus looked down at Zulu, now 10 years old and showing more gray around his muzzle, but still alert and dignified in his role as a therapy dog and ambassador for the program. "I think the difference is understanding that survival isn't enough," Marcus replied. "Zulu and I survived our deployments, survived losing our partners, survived the dark period after we came home. But survival without purpose is just existence. What we found together was a way to transform our pain into something that could help others heal." The flight home to Colorado was peaceful, with Zulu sleeping comfortably in the seat beside Marcus. As the plane descended toward Denver, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that first difficult drive home from the shelter. The house that had once felt like a hollow refuge now truly felt like home, filled with purpose and visited regularly by veterans and their families who had become part of their extended community. Their morning walks still included the woods behind the house, but now they often included other handler dog teams who came to train with Marcus and Zulu. The isolation that had once defined Marcus's post-military life had been replaced by a network of relationships built on mutual understanding and shared mission. That evening, as they settled into their familiar routine on the back porch, Marcus received a phone call that would mark another milestone in their journey. It was from the Department of Defense, offering funding for a comprehensive study of the program's effectiveness and the possibility of making K9 legacy foundation services available at every VA medical center in the country. "What do you think, partner?" Marcus asked Zulu as he ended the call. "Ready to take this national?" Zulu's response was to move closer and rest his graying head on Marcus's lap, a gesture that had become their signature form of communication. In that simple touch, Marcus felt all the trust, partnership, and mutual support that had carried them through their darkest days and into this bright future. As the stars appeared over the Colorado mountains, Marcus thought about Zeus and Staff Sergeant Chen and all the other handlers and dogs who hadn't made it home. Their sacrifice had meaning now in ways that extended far beyond the missions they had completed overseas. Through the work that Marcus and Zulu were doing, their legacy lived on in every veteran who found hope again, every retired military working dog who discovered new purpose, and every family that was healed rather than broken by the wounds of war. The nightmares still came occasionally, and both Marcus and Zulu still carried the invisible scars of their service. But those scars had become sources of strength rather than shame, badges of honor that allowed them to reach other wounded warriors in ways that nothing else could. Marcus Rodriguez had walked into an animal shelter as a broken man seeking nothing more than companionship. He had found his former K9 partner's brother-in-arms, and together they had discovered that the end of one mission could become the beginning of another. In saving each other, they had learned how to save others, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from the battles we fight, but from the healing we choose to pursue together. As Zulu settled in for the night beside Marcus's bed, both veteran warriors knew that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to serve, new veterans to help, and new chapters in a story that had transformed from tragedy into triumph through the simple power of understanding, partnership, and unconditional loyalty.